The sun hammered down on Devil's Lantern like a blacksmith's forge, turning the dusty auction square into a crucible of human misery. Heat waves shimmered off the wooden platform where flesh was traded as casually as cattle, and the stench of unwashed bodies mingled with the metallic taste of desperation that hung in the air like a curse. Lena Doyle stood barefoot on the splintered auction block, her 18 years feeling like a lifetime of accumulated sorrows. Auburn hair clung to her face in matted tangles, and purple bruises bloomed across her cheekbones like poisonous flowers. The hemp rope had carved angry welts into her wrists, and her torn dress barely preserved what remained of her dignity. The crowd pressed closer, miners with gold fever in their eyes, ranchers whose bellies strained against their vests, drifters whose intentions were written in the cruel curve of their grins. They called out their bids like vultures fighting over carrion, each number another nail in the coffin of her freedom. $20 for the red-haired filly. $30. Look at those breeding hips. $40. She's got fight in her. I like that in a woman. The auctioneer's gavel rose and fell with the rhythm of a funeral drum. Come now, gentlemen. Surely this fine specimen is worth more than your monthly whiskey bill. Then, cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk, came a voice that seemed to carry winter in its tone. $100. The crowd fell silent as if struck by lightning. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor Blackwood stood at the edge of the platform like a monument to refined cruelty. Her black dress was immaculate, despite the heat, her silver hair arranged with mathematical precision, and her pale blue eyes held the kind of cold intelligence that made strong men look away. But it was her smile that sent ice through Lena's veins, too wide too, knowing like a cat that had cornered a particularly interesting mouse. Sold. The auctioneer's voice cracked with nervous excitement. To Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood. As whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire, Eleanor's gaze locked onto Lena's with predatory intensity. For just a moment, something flickered behind those glacial eyes, hunger, desperation, and something else that made Lena's skin crawl with premonition. Come down, child. Eleanor said, her voice carrying false sweetness like honey poured over broken glass. Your education begins now. 3 weeks earlier, Lena had been a farmer's daughter with calloused hands and simple dreams. Now she was cargo in a stranger's wagon, watching the desert roll past in waves of red stone and bitter memories. The Apache raid had taken everything: her parents, her brother Tommy, even the small wooden cross her mother had carved for her 6th birthday. Only the ashes remained, and her cousin Ezra's twisted version of mercy. Don't you worry none, he'd said, counting the coins from her sale. That fancy lady'll treat you better than you deserve. Blackwood Ranch is like a palace compared to our dirt farm. Eleanor sat across from her in the carriage, studying her with the intensity of a naturalist examining a rare specimen. Tell me about your family, dear. Your bloodline, your education. I must know what I've purchased. The word hit like a physical blow. Purchased, as if she were livestock. My ma taught me reading and sums, Lena whispered. Pa showed me how to tend animals and work the land. We weren't fancy folk, but we were honest. Honest. Eleanor's smile widened, revealing teeth white as tombstones. How quaint. Honesty is such a luxury for those who can afford it. The Blackwood Ranch sprawled across the Badlands like a fortress built to keep the world at bay. Miles of desert stretched in every direction, broken only by mesas that jutted from the earth like the bones of buried giants. The main house rose from the dust like something from a fever dream, 3 stories of weathered wood and broken promises surrounded by outbuildings that crouched in its shadow. Calvin Blackwood waited on the porch, his frame bent with premature age. Once handsome grief had carved deep lines around his eyes and turned his hair silver before its time. When he looked at Lena, she saw something flicker there. Pity, perhaps, or recognition of his own trapped circumstances. Eleanor, he said quietly, his voice careful and measured. You didn't tell me she was so young. Youth is precisely the point, darling. Eleanor's laugh was bright as broken glass. Old wood breaks under pressure, but young wood bends. Isn't that right, Miss Doyle? Before Lena could answer, a woman emerged from the house, thin and nervous, with prematurely gray hair and hands that never stopped moving. Her eyes darted between Eleanor and Lena like a rabbit watching for predators. "This is Hester," Eleanor announced. "She'll show you to your room and explain the household rules. I trust you'll find everything illuminating." The house's interior was a monument to wealth built on suffering. Persian rugs covered polished floors, oil paintings stared down from gilded frames, and crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across surfaces that gleamed with obsessive care. But underneath the beauty, Lena sensed something rotten like perfume sprayed over a corpse. Her room was on the third floor, decorated in shades of rose and cream that might have been beautiful if they hadn't felt so much like a tomb. The four-poster bed dominated the space, its white lace canopy reminiscent of a wedding veil. What chilled her blood was what she didn't see. No window latches on the inside, no key for the heavy oak door. "Mrs. Blackwood wants you to be comfortable," Hester whispered, her voice barely audible. "She wants you to be grateful." "Grateful for what?" Hester's hands fluttered to her throat where a thin scar ran from ear to ear like a second mouth. "Best not to ask questions, miss. Best to smile and say thank you, and remember that some gifts come with prices." That first dinner was theater played out in a house of horrors. Eleanor presided over the mahogany table with regal authority, making pleasant conversation about weather and cattle prices, while Calvin pushed food around his plate in silence. The crystal glasses caught the lamplight like captured stars, and the silver gleamed with predatory brightness. "You must be wondering about your future here," Eleanor said, cutting her meat with surgical precision. "I imagine you have many questions." "Yes, ma'am. I'm grateful for your kindness, but I don't understand why you bought me. What do you want?" Eleanor's knife paused mid-cut. For just a moment the mask slipped, and Lena glimpsed something hungry and desperate lurking beneath the civilized veneer. "Want?" Eleanor's laugh was soft and terrible. "Oh, my dear child, I want what every woman wants. I want to hold new life in my arms. I want to hear a baby's first cry. I want to rock a child to sleep and watch them grow strong and beautiful." Her pale eyes gleamed with fanatic intensity. "I want a family." Calvin's fork clattered against his plate. "Eleanor, please, what, darling?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Please continue to pretend our marriage isn't a barren wasteland. Please act as if 15 years of empty cribs and silent nurseries means nothing." The silence that followed was suffocating. Lena looked between them, beginning to understand the true nature of her prison. "I think I'd like to retire now," she said quietly. "Of course, dear." Eleanor's smile returned bright and terrible. "Rest well. Tomorrow your real education begins." That night, Lena lay in the beautiful bed that felt like a coffin, listening to voices through the walls, Eleanor's sharp and commanding, Calvin's broken and pleading. The words were muffled, but the tone was unmistakable. The sound of a marriage built on shared desperation and mutual destruction. When she finally slept, her dreams were filled with empty cradles and women who smiled while their eyes promised murder. The education began with sunrise and a cup of tea that tasted of bitter herbs. Eleanor stood beside the bed, fully dressed, her silver hair perfect despite the early hour. "Drink this, dear," she commanded. "A special blend raspberry leaf nettle and other beneficial herbs. You'll take it every morning from now on." Lena's hand trembled as she accepted the cup. The liquid was dark as old blood and left a metallic aftertaste that made her stomach clench. "What's it for?" "Health, darling. Vitality. Preparation." Eleanor's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "A woman's body is a temple, and temples must be properly consecrated for their sacred purpose." The words sent ice water through Lena's veins. I don't understand. Oh, but you will. Eleanor moved to the window, her silhouette black against the morning sun. You see, my new home has a beautiful nursery on the second floor. Pink walls, white furniture, toys waiting for little hands to play with them. The only thing missing is a child to fill it. She turned back to Lena, her pale eyes glittering. God has blessed me with wealth and position, but he has cursed my womb with barrenness. For 15 years I've prayed for a miracle. Perhaps you are that miracle. No. The word came out barely a whisper. You can't mean what I think you mean. Eleanor's laugh was like ice cracking on a frozen pond. Can't I? You're young, healthy, untouched by the world's corruption. Perfect breeding stock, as they say in the cattle business. She moved closer, her presence looming like a storm cloud. You will bear a child for this family, or you will die in this desert and your bones will bleach white under the Arizona sun. Those are your choices, motherhood or martyrdom. The cup slipped from Lena's fingers, shattering against the floor in an explosion of porcelain and herbal tea. The dark liquid spread across the rose-colored carpet like spilled blood. I won't, Lena whispered, then louder. I won't do it. Eleanor's backhand cracked across the room like a gunshot. Stars exploded behind Lena's eyes as the taste of copper filled her mouth. When you will, Eleanor said with deadly calm. Because the alternative is worse than you can possibly imagine. She moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the brass knob. Calvin will visit you tonight. I suggest you make peace with your situation before then. The door closed with the finality of a tomb, and Lena heard the key turn in the lock. She was alone with her terror and the spreading stain on the carpet that looked too much like blood. For 3 weeks, her world narrowed to the confines of that rose-colored room. Eleanor's visits came with clockwork regularity, morning tea with its bitter herbs, afternoon lectures about duty and divine purpose, evening inspections to ensure compliance. Calvin's presence was heavier, more reluctant, a man drowning in his own complicity. It was during one sleepless night that Lena discovered the hidden room behind the fireplace. The wallpaper had been peeling, and in her desperate boredom, she'd begun picking at the loose edges. What she found beneath made her blood turn to ice. The wall had been hastily patched, and behind it lay a space no bigger than a closet. Baby clothes hung from tiny pegs, like the ghosts of children who'd never lived to wear them. Blood-stained sheets were bundled in the corner, and scratched into the wooden walls were desperate messages. My name is Margaret Sinclair. She's going to kill me. The doctor lies. The babies don't die natural. Sarah's child was born healthy. Eleanor smothered it with a pillow. And carved deeper than the rest, don't trust anyone, not even the ones who seem kind. Lena sat back on her heels, the full scope of Eleanor's madness finally clear. This wasn't about creating a family. This was about possession control, the twisted need to own what couldn't be earned or bought. Eleanor collected women like trophies, used them for their biological function, then disposed of them when they were no longer needed. The next morning brought another visitor, Dr. Patterson, a nervous man with thinning hair and hands that shook when he thought no one was looking. He examined Lena with clinical detachment, while Eleanor watched from the corner like a predator guarding its kill. Excellent health. He pronounced, packing his instruments. Should carry to term without complications. And if there are complications? Eleanor asked. The doctor's hands stilled. Mrs. Blackwood, surely you don't mean... I mean exactly what you think I mean, doctor. This investment is far too valuable to lose to medical incompetence. After he left, Lena confronted Eleanor directly. How many others have there been? Others. Eleanor's mask of innocence was perfectly crafted. Margaret, Sarah, Annie. How many girls have you murdered? Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. Murdered, my dear child. What a terrible thing to suggest. Those poor girls died in childbirth, tragic, but entirely natural. Then why hide their belongings? Why the secret room? Because, Eleanor said with icy precision, grief makes people ask uncomfortable questions. It's easier to let the dead rest in peace than to endure the prying of small minds. But Lena had seen the truth in Eleanor's eyes, the flash of something desperate and hungry that had nothing to do with grief. That night, she made her first escape attempt. The rope was braided from torn bed sheets, and desperate hope lowered from her third-story window into the desert darkness. Her plan was simple reach: the stables steal a horse ride for the nearest town. What she hadn't counted on was Eleanor's surveillance. She'd made it halfway down the rope when the lights blazed on in the courtyard below. Eleanor stood there in her nightgown, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, like a shroud, watching with the patience of a spider. "Did you really think I wouldn't hear you?" Eleanor called softly. "I hear everything in this house, every whisper, every sob, every desperate prayer." The rope began to fray where it rubbed against the windowsill. Lena looked desperately toward the stable roof, still 10 feet away. "Come down now, darling," Eleanor continued. "Before you hurt yourself, we can discuss this like civilized women." Instead, Lena tried to swing toward the building, but the rope parted with a sound like a gunshot. She fell through darkness and landed hard in the courtyard, pain exploding through her ankle like lightning. When her vision cleared, Eleanor was standing over her with the satisfied expression of a cat who'd caught its mouse. "How disappointing," she said pleasantly. "I was hoping you'd show more intelligence than your predecessors." They threw her into the root cellar beneath the kitchen, a stone-walled pit that smelled of decay and old fear. The darkness was absolute, and something scurried across her feet in the blackness. For 3 days, Eleanor visited with her leather-bound Bible reading passages about sacrifice and obedience, while Lena shivered in the cold. "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away," Eleanor would intone. But sometimes the Lord requires us to take action ourselves. When they finally pulled her from the cellar, weak and half-starved, Lena was ready with her surrender. But behind her tears of apparent defeat, something cold and calculating had taken root, something that would have made Eleanor proud if she'd recognized it. The pregnancy began in November, announced by morning sickness that left her retching into a basin, while Eleanor looked on with maternal satisfaction. Dr. Patterson confirmed what they all already knew, his nervous hands trembling as he pocketed Eleanor's gold coins. "Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwood," he said. "Your patience has been rewarded." Indeed it has. Eleanor's smile was radiant. "And the timing is perfect. We'll have our little one by summer. Won't that be wonderful?" As the weeks passed and Lena's condition became undeniable, Eleanor's mask began to slip. The pretense of care evaporated, replaced by the cold calculation of a woman protecting a valuable investment. "You'll take your meals in your room from now on," Eleanor announced one morning. "I can't have you wandering about in your condition, too many risks." The isolation was nearly complete. But it was during this confinement that Lena made her most horrifying discovery. Hidden in Eleanor's private study was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with meticulous records dating back years. Each entry detailed a different girl, their names, ages, the circumstances of their acquisition, and most chillingly, the methods of their disposal. Margaret Sinclair. One entry read, "Age 19, acquired from Denver orphanage for $75. Pregnancy proceeded normally until month 8 when subject became difficult to manage. Terminated by pillow suffocation during simulated difficult labor. Child disposed of due to physical defects, cleft lip. Dr. Patterson provided false death certificate. Body buried in north pasture." Entry after entry revealed the same pattern. Eleanor would acquire vulnerable women, impregnate them through coercion, then murder both mother and child if they failed to meet her impossible standards of perfection. The children who survived infancy were raised as her own until they too were eliminated for various perceived flaws. Lena's hands shook as she read the final entry. Lena Doyle, age 18. Acquired at Devil's Lantern auction for $100. Strong bloodline, good health, suitable for breeding. Pregnancy confirmed November 1884. Expected delivery July 1885. Notes: subject shows more intelligence than previous specimens. Increased surveillance recommended. At the bottom of the page, in Eleanor's precise handwriting, prepare final solution in case of complications. That night, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Lena went into premature labor. The contractions hit like waves of agony, each one stronger than the last. She called for help, but the response came not from a doctor, but from Eleanor herself, fully dressed and carrying a black leather bag. How exciting, Eleanor said, settling into her chair with obvious anticipation. Though you're early, no matter, babies come in their own time. Get Dr. Patterson? Lena gasped between contractions. Oh, but the good doctor is unavailable this evening, Eleanor replied smoothly. Terrible shame his horse threw a shoe just as he was leaving town. But don't worry, dear. I've delivered many babies. You're in excellent hands. The lie was delivered with such casual cruelty that it took Lena a moment to realize its full implications. Eleanor had planned this, orchestrated it, to ensure no witnesses would be present for what was about to happen. Where's Calvin? Lena demanded. Calvin is sleeping very deeply tonight. I gave him a special toddy for his nerves. Eleanor's smile was arctic. It's just you and me, darling, just as it should be. The contractions came faster now, and Lena could feel the baby crowning. Eleanor moved with practiced efficiency, but her eyes held a strange light, not the compassion of a midwife, but the hunger of a predator, finally cornering its prey. Here she comes. Eleanor breathed as the baby slipped free. Oh, she's perfect. She's absolutely perfect. For one brief moment, Lena heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her daughter's first cry, strong and healthy and absolutely alive. But then Eleanor was pulling the baby away, wrapping her in a blanket with possessive care. Let me see her. Lena gasped, reaching out with shaking hands. Let me hold my daughter. Your daughter? Eleanor's laugh was soft and deadly. Oh, my dear confused child, you were never anything more than a vessel. This baby belongs to me now. She moved toward the door, cradling the infant against her chest. You've served your purpose, dear. Now it's time for you to rest, permanently. Eleanor opened her black bag and withdrew a pillow, the same pillow she'd used on the others. But before she could approach the bed, the door burst open, and Calvin stumbled in his face, twisted with desperate fury. No, he shouted, grabbing Eleanor's wrist. Not again, I won't let you kill another one. Calvin. Eleanor's composure cracked for the first time. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be unconscious. I didn't drink your poison tonight. He said, his voice thick with self-loathing. I poured it in the plant when you weren't looking. I couldn't stand by and watch you murder another innocent girl. Eleanor's eyes narrowed dangerously. You pathetic fool. Do you think your sudden attack of conscience changes anything I own you, Calvin Blackwood? I own your debts, your secrets, your very soul. Maybe, Calvin replied, producing a revolver from his coat. But I'm done being your puppet. The gun wavered in his shaking hands, and Eleanor sensed his weakness. She smiled, shifting the baby to one arm while reaching into her bag with the other. You won't shoot me, darling, she said with deadly certainty. You don't have the courage. You never did. Her hand emerged, holding a small silver pistol, a lady's gun, but lethal at close range. Put the gun down, Calvin, before you embarrass yourself further. Eleanor, please, Calvin begged. She's just a girl. The baby is innocent. End this madness. Madness. Eleanor's laugh was the sound of breaking glass. The only madness here is your weakness. I'm trying to build something beautiful, something perfect, and you want to destroy it with your sentimentality." She raised the pistol, her finger tightening on the trigger. "If you won't be part of the solution, then you're part of the problem." The shot echoed through the room like thunder. Calvin staggered backward, a red stain spreading across his shirt, his own weapon clattering to the floor. He looked down at the wound with surprise, then at Eleanor, with something that might have been relief. "At least," he whispered, "at least I tried." He collapsed beside the bed, his breathing shallow and labored. Eleanor looked down at him with the same detached interest she might show a dying insect. "How disappointing," she said, then turned her attention back to Lena. Now where were we? But Lena was no longer the helpless victim Eleanor expected. The sight of Calvin's sacrifice had awakened something primal and dangerous in her chest, a mother's fury that transcended pain and exhaustion. As Eleanor approached with the pillow, Lena lunged forward with strength she didn't know she possessed. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and desperation, and the baby's cries filling the air as she was thrust into Calvin's dying arms. Eleanor was stronger than she looked, her grip on the pillow like iron. But Lena fought with the desperate strength of a woman with nothing left to lose. "You can't have her." Lena snarled, her fingernails raking across Eleanor's face. "She's mine. She belongs to me." Eleanor bucked like a wild horse, trying to force the pillow over Lena's face. "I paid for her. I planned for her." They rolled across the floor, each fighting for control, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Eleanor's silver hair came loose from its pins, and her pale eyes burned with fanatic intensity. "I've waited 15 years for this," she hissed. 15 years of disappointment and failure. "I won't let you take her from me." But Lena's desperation gave her an edge that Eleanor's madness couldn't match. She drove her knee into Eleanor's ribs, then grabbed a shard of broken glass from the shattered teacup. The makeshift weapon cut deep into Eleanor's wrist, and she screamed in pain and rage. "You little bitch." Eleanor's composure shattered completely. "You ungrateful whore, I gave you everything: shelter, food, purpose, and this is how you repay me." She lunged for her fallen pistol, but Lena was already moving. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace and brought it down with all her strength. The metal caught Eleanor across the temple with a sickening crunch, and the older woman crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. For a moment, the only sounds were the baby's cries and Calvin's labored breathing. Eleanor lay motionless, blood trickling from her scalp onto the rose-colored carpet. Lena checked for a pulse and found it weak but steady. "Is she dead?" Calvin whispered from where he lay dying. "No," Lena replied, gathering her daughter into her arms. "But she's finished." Calvin's eyes found hers, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw peace there. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "For everything. I'm so damn sorry." "I know," Lena said gently. "You tried to save us at the end. That matters." He nodded weakly, then closed his eyes for the last time. In the distance, Lena could hear horses approaching. Mrs. Pike's voice calling out through the storm. The older woman had been watching the ranch for weeks, waiting for the right moment to act. Now she burst through the door like an avenging angel, her weathered face fierce with determination. "Lord Almighty," she breathed, taking in the scene. "What happened here?" "Justice," Lena replied, simply holding her daughter close. "Finally, justice." They bound Eleanor's wounds and secured her unconscious form while they waited for the territorial marshal. When she finally woke, her pale eyes were empty of everything except confusion and a childlike bewilderment. "Where's my baby?" she asked plaintively. "I had a baby, didn't I? A perfect little girl with dark hair and my eyes." "You never had a baby, Eleanor," Mrs. Pike said firmly. "You stole other women's children and murdered their mothers. But that's over now." Eleanor's face crumpled like a child denied a favorite toy. "But I wanted one so badly. I prayed and prayed, but God never answered. I had to take matters into my own hands. The marshal arrived with the dawn, along with a prison wagon and a small posse. Eleanor went quietly, her mind apparently broken by the violence of the night. They found her journal, her collection of macabre trophies, and the makeshift cemetery in the north pasture where she'd buried her victims. Calvin was laid to rest beside his parents, his gravestone reading simply, "He tried to do right at the end." Eleanor was committed to the Territorial Asylum, where she spent her remaining days in a padded cell speaking to children who existed only in her fractured imagination. Lena named her daughter Rose for the flower that bloomed most beautifully in the harshest soil. They traveled west to California, where Mrs. Pike's sister had offered them sanctuary and a fresh start. But before they left Arizona Territory, Lena made one final stop. At the ruins of Blackwood Ranch, now nothing but charred timber and bitter memories, she placed a small wooden cross in the ground. It bore the names of all Eleanor's victims, Margaret, Sarah, Annie, and the others, whose stories had been lost to time and madness. "Your deaths weren't meaningless," she whispered to the desert wind. "They taught me that love can't be stolen or forced or bought. It has to be freely given." She looked down at Rose sleeping peacefully in her arms and felt the weight of that truth settle in her heart. This child would grow up knowing she was wanted for herself, not as a solution to someone else's emptiness. She would be loved without conditions, protected without possession, cherished without chains. As their wagon rolled toward the horizon, Lena allowed herself one last look back at the place that had nearly destroyed her. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere in that vast desert, the bones of evil were finally beginning to bleach clean. She had survived. Her daughter had survived. And in that survival lay the seeds of something Eleanor had never understood, that the most powerful force in the world wasn't the desire to possess, but the courage to let go. The road ahead stretched endlessly toward tomorrow, and for the first time in months, Lena Doyle was not afraid of what it might bring. The morning after that first terrible dinner, Lena woke to find a breakfast tray beside her bed and a note written in Eleanor's precise script. "Your training begins today. Dress appropriately and wait for instruction." The clothes laid out for her were expensive silk undergarments, a dress of deep blue wool leather shoes that actually fit. But as she dressed, Lena noticed something chilling. Every garment had been tailored to accommodate a woman in various stages of pregnancy. The waistlines were adjustable, the bodices designed to expand the sleeves cut to hide swollen hands and arms. Eleanor had been planning this for a long time. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Hester entered carrying fresh linens, her nervous energy filling the room like static electricity. "Mrs. Blackwood wants to see you in the conservatory," she whispered, avoiding eye contact. "Best not to keep her waiting." "Hester," Lena said softly, "how long have you worked here?" The woman's hands stilled on the bed sheets. 5 years, miss. Since my husband died in the mines." "Have there been other girls, other women like me?" Hester's face went white as chalk. "I don't know what you mean." But her eyes told a different story. They held the haunted look of someone who'd witnessed unspeakable things and been forced to remain silent. The conservatory was Eleanor's pride, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants that seemed to thrive in the desert heat. Orchids bloomed in impossible colors, and vines heavy with strange fruit twisted around iron supports. The air was thick and humid, like breathing through wet wool. Eleanor stood among her plants like a goddess in her garden, wearing a white dress that made her look ethereal and dangerous. In her hands was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "Ah, there you are, dear," she said without looking up. "Come sit beside me. We have much to discuss." Lena took the indicated chair, a wrought iron piece that felt more like a throne than furniture. Eleanor's pale eyes studied her with scientific precision. "Do you know what this is?" Eleanor asked, holding up the journal. "A book, not just any book. This is the record of the Blackwood bloodline going back 4 generations. Every birth, every death, every triumph and tragedy of this family is recorded here. Eleanor's voice took on an almost religious reverence. And you, my dear, are about to become part of that legacy. She opened the journal to a page near the back, where fresh ink gleamed wetly. At the top was written, Lena Doyle, acquired November 1884. What does that mean? Lena asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. It means you're no longer just a girl without family or fortune. You're part of something greater, a sacred trust that's been passed down through the Blackwood line for generations. Eleanor's eyes gleamed with fanatic intensity. My husband's great-grandmother was barren, you see. She couldn't give the family an heir. So she found alternative methods. Eleanor turned to an earlier page, revealing a faded daguerreotype of a stern-looking woman standing beside a much younger girl. The family resemblance between the older woman and Eleanor was unmistakable. Great-grandmother Abigail acquired 3 young women over the course of 5 years. Eleanor continued. Each bore children for the family, beautiful, healthy children who carried on the Blackwood name with pride. It's a family tradition, you might say. What happened to the women? Lena's voice was barely a whisper. They were well cared for naturally, fed, clothed, given purpose. And when their service was complete, Eleanor's smile was cold as winter morning. Well, the desert keeps its secrets. The implication hit Lena like a physical blow. This wasn't just about one mad woman's obsession, it was a generational pattern of horror passed down like a twisted inheritance. I won't do it, Lena said, standing abruptly. I won't be part of your sick family tradition. Eleanor's laugh was musical and terrifying. Oh, my dear child, you already are. She rang a small silver bell, and immediately Ike appeared in the doorway, the massive mute handyman, whose scarred face revealed nothing of his thoughts. Behind him came 2 other men, Lena hadn't seen before, both wearing the rough clothes of ranch hands, but with the hard eyes of hired killers. I believe Miss Doyle needs some time to contemplate her situation, Eleanor said pleasantly. Perhaps a few days in the meditation chamber will help clarify her thinking. The meditation chamber was worse than the root cellar, a windowless stone box beneath the house's foundation, so small that Lena could barely lie down. The walls were covered with scratches and stains that told the story of previous occupants' desperation. In one corner, barely visible in the dim light from a single candle, someone had carved a message. God help us all. They left her there for a week. When they finally pulled her out weak and half-mad from isolation, Lena was ready to agree to anything. But Eleanor wasn't finished with her education yet. Now that you understand the gravity of your situation, Eleanor said, leading her to a different part of the house, it's time you met your predecessors. She unlocked a door Lena had never seen before, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. The air that rose from below was thick with the smell of decay and something else, something sweet and cloying that made Lena's stomach turn. After you, dear, Eleanor said, her voice bright with anticipation. The basement was a chamber of horrors that would have made Dante weep. Glass display cases lined the walls, each containing a grotesque tableau. In one was a wedding dress, yellowed with age, positioned as if worn by an invisible bride. In another was a christening gown, so small it could only have fit a newborn, surrounded by wilted flowers. But it was the center of the room that made Lena's blood turn to ice. A long table held row upon row of daguerreotypes, portraits of young women in various stages of pregnancy, their faces showing emotions ranging from resignation to stark terror. Above each photograph was a brass nameplate and dates of birth and death. Margaret Sinclair, 1861-1882. Sarah Williams, 1859-1881. Annie Murphy, 1863-1883. Eleanor's voice held the reverence of a curator in a museum. Each one contributed to the Blackwood legacy in her own way. "You're insane," Lena whispered. "Am I?" Eleanor moved to another case, this one containing tiny shoes, rattles, and other infant belongings. These women lived lives of purpose. They brought new life into the world, contributed to something greater than themselves. What more noble calling could there be? She turned to face Lena, her pale eyes burning with messianic fervor. "And now it's your turn to join their ranks, to become part of something eternal and beautiful." The inciting incident extended. The true horror began on a cold December morning when Lena missed her monthly cycle. Eleanor's examination was clinical and thorough, conducted with the detached professionalism of a veterinarian checking livestock. "Excellent," Eleanor pronounced, making notes in her leather journal. "Right on schedule. Dr. Patterson will be so pleased." Dr. Patterson arrived that afternoon, a thin, nervous man, with trembling hands and the bloodshot eyes of a chronic drinker. His examination was uncomfortable and degrading, but it was his whispered conversation with Eleanor afterward that chilled Lena to the bone. "The previous subjects showed complications around the 7th month," he was saying. "Premature labor hemorrhaging. We'll need to monitor this one more carefully." "Of course," Eleanor replied smoothly. "We can't afford to lose another investment to medical incompetence." "Mrs. Blackwood, I must protest the characterization of Your medical skills are adequate, Doctor. It's your discretion I value most. The territorial authorities need never know about our arrangements." Patterson's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "Of course. My lips are sealed as always." After he left, Eleanor's mask of maternal concern finally slipped completely. She stood over Lena's bed like a general surveying a battlefield, her pale eyes calculating and cold. "The morning sickness should begin soon," she said matter-of-factly. "I've prepared a special diet to ensure optimal development. You'll eat what I tell you when I tell you in the portions I specify. Any deviation will result in punishment." "What kind of punishment?" Lena asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Eleanor's smile was arctic. "The kind that leaves no permanent marks, but ensures complete compliance. I've had years to perfect my methods." She moved to the window, looking out at the vast desert that surrounded the ranch like a moat of death. "You should know that escape is impossible. The nearest town is 50 miles away, and the desert between here and there is filled with Apache bandits and wild animals. Even if you somehow manage to steal a horse and supplies, I have men who would track you down within hours." "What men?" "The same men who ensure my household runs smoothly. The same men who helped acquire you from your dear cousin Ezra." Eleanor's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Did you really think that auction was random chance? I've been watching you for months, dear child. Studying you, planning for you. Your family's death was convenient timing." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. "You knew about the Apache raid." "Knew about it, my dear. I arranged it." Eleanor's confession was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. A few gold coins in the right hands, a whispered suggestion about undefended homesteads. These things right themselves. Lena's world tilted on its axis. Her family's death hadn't been random violence. It had been calculated murder, orchestrated by the woman who now held her captive. "You monster," she breathed. "Monster." Eleanor's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "I prefer to think of myself as a woman of vision. Your parents were dirt farmers living hand to mouth. Your brother was weak and sickly. What kind of future did you have with them? But here with me, you have purpose, meaning, the chance to create something beautiful and lasting." She moved closer to the bed, her presence looming like a storm cloud. "You should thank me, really. I've elevated you from peasant to participant in something magnificent." That night, Lena lay in her beautiful prison and wept for her murdered family. But underneath the grief, something harder was forming, a cold determination that would have made Eleanor proud if she'd recognized it for what it was. The student was learning from the master, but not the lessons Eleanor intended to teach. First obstacle expanded. The first escape attempt came in January, during a blizzard that turned the desert into a white hell. Lena had spent weeks planning, watching the guards' routines, memorizing the layout of the house. She'd stolen a knife from the kitchen, saved scraps of food, and fashioned warm clothes from stolen blankets. The rope made from bed sheets lowered her from the third-story window into the howling wind and snow. Her plan was to reach the stables, steal a horse, and ride for the Mexican border. What she hadn't counted on was Eleanor's surveillance network. She'd made it halfway across the courtyard when the dogs found her. Two massive mastiffs emerged from the storm like demons, their growls barely audible over the howling wind. They didn't attack immediately. They'd been trained to corner, not kill. Behind them came Ike, his bulk moving through the snow with surprising grace. "Mrs. Blackwood thought you might try something like this," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "She wanted me to tell you that disappointment makes her creative." They dragged her back to the house, where Eleanor waited in her nightgown, her silver hair loose around her shoulders like a shroud. Her pale eyes held a light that made Lena's blood turn to ice. "Such ingratitude," Eleanor murmured, studying Lena's bedraggled form. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay my kindness." "Kindness?" Lena spat. "You murdered my family. You're keeping me prisoner. I gave you purpose." Eleanor's mask slipped, revealing the madness beneath. "I elevated you from nothing to the sacred role of motherhood. And this is how you show your appreciation." She nodded to Ike, who produced a leather strap from his coat. 20 lashes should help clarify your thinking. And if you scream too loudly, we'll have to gag you. Can't have you disturbing the household." The beating was methodical and brutal, each lash calculated to cause maximum pain without permanent damage. Eleanor supervised with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. "Pain is a teacher," she explained between strokes. "It clarifies the mind, focuses the will. By the time we're finished, you'll understand your place in this household much better." But the physical punishment was nothing compared to what came next. They locked her in a room Lena had never seen before, a nursery decorated in shades of pink and white, with a crib that had been waiting empty for years. "This is where your baby will sleep." Eleanor said, her voice soft, with maternal longing. "I've been preparing this room for so long, dreaming of the day I'd finally have a child to fill it." She moved to the crib, running her hands over the carved wooden rails with reverent care. "I've imagined every detail, the mobile turning slowly in the lamplight, the soft breathing of an innocent child, the perfect peace of a mother watching over her baby." "It won't be your baby," Lena said through gritted teeth. "It will be mine." Eleanor's face hardened. "Will it? How interesting. Tell me, dear, what exactly do you think motherhood means?" Before Lena could answer, Eleanor opened a trunk beside the crib and began removing its contents. Baby clothes, toys, bottles, all the paraphernalia of infant care. But there was something wrong with it all. The clothes were too small, as if made for premature babies. The toys were expensive, but unused still in their original wrapping. The bottles were clean to the point of sterility. These belonged to the others. Eleanor said, her voice dreamy with memory. Margaret's baby wore this christening gown for exactly 3 hours before the Lord called him home. Sarah's little girl played with these rattles for 2 whole weeks before the fever took her. And Annie's son, her voice broke slightly. He lived for almost a month. I thought perhaps he would be the one to stay. The truth hit Lena like a sledgehammer. Eleanor hadn't been killing the babies out of cruelty. She'd been keeping them, raising them, loving them in her twisted way. And when they inevitably died from neglect, inadequate care, or deliberate harm, she'd convinced herself it was God's will rather than her own incompetence. "You're not just a kidnapper," Lena whispered. "You're a child killer. I am a mother." Eleanor shrieked, her composure finally shattering completely. "I am a woman who has sacrificed everything for the chance to hold a baby in my arms. These children died because they were weak, because they weren't worthy of the love I offered them." She threw the baby clothes at Lena's feet in a rage. "But your child will be different. Your child will be strong enough to survive, smart enough to thrive, perfect enough to stay." The madness in her eyes was complete now, no longer hidden behind a mask of civilization. Lena realized she wasn't just fighting for her freedom, she was fighting for her unborn child's life against a woman who would literally love it to death. Rising action, extensive development. As winter gave way to spring, Lena's pregnancy progressed under Eleanor's obsessive supervision. Every meal was carefully planned, every activity monitored, every aspect of her existence controlled with military precision. But the most insidious part of her captivity wasn't the physical constraints, it was the psychological manipulation. Eleanor had a gift for finding her prisoners' weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. With Lena, she focused on maternal anxiety. "The baby seems small for this stage," Eleanor would muse during her daily examinations. "I do hope there aren't any developmental issues." "What kind of issues?" Lena would ask, unable to hide her concern. "Oh, the usual things. Weak lungs, heart defects, mental deficiencies. The previous babies all had such problems. Such a tragedy." Eleanor's voice would carry just the right note of regret. "But I'm sure your child will be different. I'm sure she'll be perfect." The pronoun wasn't accidental. Eleanor had already decided the baby was a girl, had already chosen her name, Victoria. Eleanor Blackwood had already planned every detail of her upbringing. The child's actual sex, like everything else about her, was irrelevant to Eleanor's fantasy. Dr. Patterson's visits became more frequent as the pregnancy progressed, his examinations more invasive and degrading. But it was during one of these sessions that Lena overheard a conversation that chilled her to the bone. "The girl is asking too many questions," Patterson was telling Eleanor. "She's starting to piece together what happened to the others. Let her ask." Eleanor replied calmly. "Knowledge can be its own prison. The more she understands about her situation, the more hopeless she'll feel. And if she tries to escape again, she won't. Not in her condition. She's too far along now, too invested in the child's welfare. Maternal instinct is a powerful chain." But Eleanor had underestimated Lena's resourcefulness. Unable to escape physically, she began to explore other options. The house was full of secrets, hidden passages, and forgotten rooms that told the story of the Blackwood family's dark history. In the attic, she found trunks full of correspondence dating back decades. Letters between Eleanor and her supplier's men who specialized in acquiring domestic staff from orphanages, workhouses, and auction blocks. Bills of sale for women listed as household goods. Shipping manifests that treated human cargo like livestock. One letter dated 5 years earlier was particularly damning. "Mrs. Blackwood, your special order has arrived from Denver. The subject matches your specifications, exactly, young, healthy, recently orphaned. As requested, we've told her she's being sent to a respectable family as a governess. She suspects nothing. The usual fee applies, plus expenses for transportation and discretion. Your servant, J. Morrison, Territorial Employment Agency." Morrison. Lena remembered that name from her own ordeal. He'd been the man who'd arranged the auction, who'd handled the paperwork for her sale. Eleanor's network of human traffickers stretched across the entire territory, possibly beyond. But the most horrifying discovery came in Eleanor's private study. Hidden behind a false wall was a collection of photographs that made Lena's stomach turn. They showed Eleanor with various babies, all posed in maternal scenes that would have looked normal if not for one chilling detail: the children's eyes. Even in the primitive daguerreotypes, their terror was unmistakable. Worse still were Eleanor's own notes written in her precise script. Baby Catherine Margaret's child, day 12. Subject continues to cry excessively. Have reduced feeding schedule to encourage compliance. Weakness may be hereditary. Day 18. Breathing difficulties noted. Dr. Patterson suggests natural causes, but I suspect willful defiance. Will monitor closely. Day 21. Subject expired during the night. Probable cause: insufficient will to live. Have prepared burial site in North Pasture. Note for next acquisition: seek stronger bloodlines. The pattern was always the same. Eleanor would take obsessive care of the babies, at first treating them like precious dolls. But when they failed to meet her impossible standards, when they cried too much, ate too little, or simply exhibited normal infant behavior, she would begin to withdraw care. The children would weaken and die, and Eleanor would convince herself it was due to their own inadequacy rather than her neglect. Lena realized with growing horror that her own child was doomed unless she could find a way to escape or neutralize Eleanor before the birth. But with only weeks remaining in her pregnancy, time was running out. It was then that she discovered Eleanor's greatest secret. Hidden in the basement behind the Museum of Dead Women and Children was another room that Eleanor visited every night like a shrine. Inside was a single crib, ornate and expensive, surrounded by hundreds of toys and clothes that had never been used. At the head of the crib was a small headstone that read simply, "Baby James Blackwood, born and died March 15th, 1869. This was Eleanor's original child, her own biological son who had died in infancy 15 years earlier. Everything else, the kidnappings, the forced pregnancies, the systematic murder of women and babies, was Eleanor's attempt to replace the one child she'd truly lost. The revelation explained everything: Eleanor's obsession with perfect children, her inability to accept normal infant behavior, her willingness to dispose of babies who didn't measure up to her fantasy. She wasn't trying to become a mother. She was trying to resurrect a specific child who had died decades ago. Armed with this knowledge, Lena began to formulate a plan. Eleanor's madness had a logic to it, twisted though it was. If Lena could exploit that logic, she might be able to turn Eleanor's obsession against her. But first she needed allies. Mrs. Pike had been watching the Blackwood Ranch for months, her suspicions aroused by the pattern of young women arriving and disappearing. As the neighbor closest to the ranch, she'd made several attempts to visit, only to be turned away by armed guards, who claimed Mrs. Blackwood was indisposed. The old woman wasn't easily deterred. She began leaving food at the property line: pies, preserves, fresh bread wrapped in cloth. Always with a note, "For the young lady with Christian charity." The guards would confiscate the offerings, but the message was clear: someone was watching, someone cared. Lena managed to get word to Mrs. Pike through Martha the cook, who was growing increasingly disturbed by what she witnessed in the Blackwood house. The communication was simple. A handkerchief hung from Lena's window in a specific pattern, a signal that meant, "I need help." Mrs. Pike's response came the next day, in the form of a rifle shot not aimed at anyone, but fired into the air as a warning. Eleanor's guards investigated, but found nothing except hoofprints leading away from the ranch. The message was clear: the prisoner wasn't forgotten. As Lena's due date approached, Eleanor's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would spend hours in the basement shrine, talking to the empty crib as if it contained a living child. Her journals became incoherent rambles about divine purpose and sacred destiny. She began wearing white exclusively, like a bride or a nun, and her pale eyes took on the glassy look of someone who had retreated so far into fantasy that reality could barely touch her. Dr. Patterson expressed concern about Eleanor's mental state, but his protests were silenced with increasingly large payments. He was too deep in her web of corruption to escape now, his medical license dependent on Eleanor's silence about his participation in her crimes. Calvin, meanwhile, was disappearing into a bottle of whiskey, his guilt and self-loathing finally overwhelming his ability to function. He would wander the house at night like a ghost, muttering apologies to women who were no longer alive to hear them. Lena tried to reach him to convince him to help her escape, but he was too broken to be reliable. "I'm damned," he would whisper when she pleaded with him. "Damned for what I've done, damned for what I've allowed. There's no redemption for men like me." "Then help me," Lena would plead. "Save my baby. Do one good thing before you die." But Calvin would just shake his head and stumble away, clutching his bottle like a lifeline to oblivion. As summer approached and Lena's pregnancy entered its final weeks, Eleanor's preparations became increasingly elaborate. She had commissioned a custom cradle inlaid with silver and mother of pearl. She had ordered clothes fit for a princess, toys imported from Europe, a nursery that would have bankrupted most families. But most chilling of all, she had prepared contingency plans, if anything should happen to you during the birth. Eleanor told Lena one evening, "I want you to know that your sacrifice won't be in vain. The baby will be raised with every advantage, every opportunity. She'll never want for anything." "Nothing will happen to me," Lena said firmly. Eleanor's smile was sad and knowing. "Oh, my dear child, birth is such a dangerous time, especially for young mothers. Complications can arise so suddenly, so unexpectedly. Even Dr. Patterson, skilled as he is, sometimes loses patience." The threat was delivered with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, but its implications were crystal clear. Eleanor was planning to murder Lena during childbirth, making it look like a medical complication. With the mother dead, there would be no one to challenge Eleanor's claim to the child. That night, Lena felt the first contractions begin. The extended midpoint twist. The labor began at midnight, during the worst storm in Arizona Territory's recorded history. Lightning split the sky like God's own wrath, and thunder shook the house to its foundations. Rain hammered against the windows with such force that it sounded like machine gun fire, and the wind howled through the desert like the voices of the damned. Eleanor was ready, had been ready for weeks. She appeared in Lena's doorway, fully dressed in white, carrying a black leather bag that contained more than medical supplies. Her pale eyes burned with fanatic intensity as she surveyed her prize. "How wonderful," she breathed. "The timing is perfect, a new life born in the midst of God's fury. How biblical." "Get Dr. Patterson," Lena gasped between contractions. "Oh, but the good doctor is unavailable tonight," Eleanor replied with false regret. "Such terrible weather, his horse couldn't possibly make it through the storm. But don't worry, dear. I've assisted at many births. You're in capable hands." The lie was delivered with such casual cruelty that it took Lena a moment to grasp its full implications. Eleanor had orchestrated this, waited for the storm, sent Patterson away, isolated them completely. Whatever was about to happen, there would be no witnesses to contradict Eleanor's version of events. "Where's Calvin?" Lena demanded. "Calvin is indisposed. I gave him something to help him sleep through the noise." Eleanor's smile was arctic. "We wouldn't want him disturbing us at such a sacred moment." The contractions intensified, coming in waves that left Lena gasping and clawing at the bedsheets. Eleanor moved around the room with practiced efficiency, but her preparations weren't entirely medical. She lit candles at specific points, arranged strange herbs in patterns that seemed ritualistic, and muttered words that sounded more like incantations than prayers. "What are you doing?" Lena managed to ask. "Preparing," Eleanor replied simply. "This birth must be perfect, blessed, sanctified. Too many of my previous children were tainted by doubt and fear. But not this one. This one will be pure." As the hours passed and the storm raged outside, Lena began to understand the true depth of Eleanor's madness. This wasn't just about stealing a baby. It was about performing some twisted sacrament, using birth itself as a ritual to resurrect Eleanor's long-dead son. "Tell me about baby James." Lena gasped during a brief respite between contractions. Eleanor's hand stilled for just a moment. "What did you say?" "Your son, your real son, the one who died in 1869. Eleanor's face went white, then red, then white again. "How do you know about James?" "I found his shrine in the basement. I know he was your only biological child, and I know you've been trying to replace him ever since." For the first time since Lena had known her, Eleanor's composure cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face, and her voice broke with genuine anguish. "He was perfect," she whispered. "So beautiful, so innocent. He lived for exactly 17 hours. I counted every minute, every second. And then God took him away." "So you decided to take other people's children?" "I decided to give God another chance." Eleanor's voice rose to a shriek. "I provided worthy vessels, created perfect conditions, offered everything a child could need. But they kept disappointing me, kept dying, kept leaving me alone." She grabbed Lena's shoulders with bruising force. "But your baby will be different. Your baby will stay. She'll have James's eyes, his perfect little hands, his innocent soul reborn into a new body." The full scope of Eleanor's delusion became clear. She wasn't just trying to steal Lena's child. She was trying to use the baby as a vessel for her dead son's resurrection. In her twisted mind, every infant she'd murdered had been a failed attempt to bring James back from the dead. A massive contraction seized Lena stronger than anything she'd felt before. She could feel the baby moving, shifting, preparing for birth. But Eleanor wasn't done with her revelations. "Do you want to know the truth about the others?" she asked, her voice soft and terrible. "Margaret, Sarah, Annie, they all thought they were so clever, so strong. They thought they could resist me, could somehow escape with their babies intact." She opened her black bag and withdrew a small vial filled with clear liquid. But they didn't understand that motherhood requires sacrifice. Sometimes the mother must die so the child can truly live. "What is that?" Lena asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Insurance," Eleanor replied. "A concentrated dose of laudanum mixed with other compounds. Completely undetectable in post-mortem examination, produces symptoms identical to complications of childbirth. Dr. Patterson has been most helpful in perfecting the formula." The betrayal hit Lena like a physical blow. Patterson wasn't just Eleanor's unwilling accomplice. He was her active partner, helping her develop methods to murder new mothers while making their deaths look natural. "You're going to kill me," Lena said. "It wasn't a question. I'm going to free you," Eleanor corrected gently. "Free you from the burden of watching your child grow up in this harsh world. Free you from the pain of eventual loss. The dead can't suffer, dear child. They can only find peace." Another contraction hit, and Lena felt the baby crowning. Eleanor moved into position, her movements clinical and precise, despite the madness burning in her eyes. "Here she comes," Eleanor breathed. "Oh, she's beautiful. She's absolutely perfect." The baby emerged in a rush of fluid and relief, and for one brief, shining moment, Lena heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Her daughter's first cry, strong and healthy and absolutely alive. But then Eleanor was pulling the baby away, wrapping her in a blanket with possessive care. "Welcome back, my darling James," she whispered to the infant. "Mama has missed you so much." "Her name is Rose," Lena said firmly, trying to sit up despite her exhaustion. "She's my daughter, and her name is Rose." Eleanor's face hardened. "Her name is Victoria Eleanor Blackwood, and she is the reincarnation of my beloved son. You were merely the vessel, a surrogate womb to carry James back to me." She uncorked the vial of poison, her movements calm and deliberate. This will be quick and painless. You'll simply go to sleep, and when they find you in the morning, it will look like your heart gave out from the strain of childbirth. So tragic, but these things happen. But as Eleanor raised the vial to Lena's lips, the bedroom door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and rain. Calvin stood in the doorway, like an avenging angel, his clothes soaked with storm water, and his eyes burning with desperate fury. "No," he roared. "Not again. I won't let you kill another one." Eleanor spun around, her composure shattered. "Calvin, but you're supposed to be unconscious, dead." Calvin's laugh was bitter as desert wind. "I stopped drinking your poison nightcaps weeks ago, Eleanor. I've been watching, waiting, preparing for this moment." In his hand was an old army Colt, its barrel trained on Eleanor's chest. "Put down the poison and step away from the girl. You don't understand," Eleanor said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "She has to die. It's the only way to ensure James's successful return. The spiritual transfer requires... James is dead." Calvin's voice cracked like a whip. "He died 15 years ago, and all your murdering and scheming won't bring him back." "Liar!" Eleanor shrieked. "He's here. He's in this baby. I can see his eyes, his perfect little features." She clutched the infant tighter, and Rose began to cry, not the healthy wail of a newborn, but the distressed whimper of a child in danger. "Eleanor, you're holding her too tight," Lena warned, struggling to get up from the bed. "You're hurting her." "I'm protecting her." Eleanor's eyes were wild with madness. "Protecting James from those who would steal him away again." She backed toward the window, still holding Rose in one arm, while pointing the poison vial at Calvin with the other. "Stay back, both of you. If you come any closer, I'll throw us both out the window. Better we should die together than be separated again." The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury. Lightning struck close enough to shake the house, and the lights went out, plunging them into a hellscape of shadows and candlelight. In the flickering darkness, Eleanor looked like a demon clutching an innocent soul. "Please," Lena begged, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. "Please don't hurt her. She's just a baby." "She's my baby." Eleanor's voice rose to a shriek that competed with the thunder outside. "James has come back to me, and I won't let anyone take him away again." But even as she spoke, her grip on Rose was becoming dangerously tight. The baby's cries grew weaker, more distressed, and Lena could see the infant's face beginning to turn pale from lack of air. "Eleanor, you're strangling her," Calvin said, his voice carefully controlled despite the gun in his hand. "Look at what you're doing. You're killing the child you claim to love." For just a moment, Eleanor's madness wavered. She looked down at Rose, seeing perhaps for the first time not the reincarnation of her dead son, but a real living baby in desperate need of air. Her grip loosened slightly, and Rose's cries grew stronger. But the moment of clarity passed quickly. Eleanor's face hardened again, and she raised the vial of poison like a weapon. "If I can't have James," she said with deadly calm, "then no one can have this child. I'll poison her myself before I let you steal her from me." She moved the vial toward Rose's tiny mouth, and that's when Lena found strength she didn't know she possessed. Despite the exhaustion of childbirth, despite the blood loss and pain, she launched herself from the bed with the fury of a mother protecting her young. The climax extended and intensified. The collision sent Eleanor staggering backward, but she managed to keep hold of both the baby and the poison. All three women crashed into the antique dresser, sending crystal perfume bottles and silver hairbrushes flying in all directions. The impact jarred Rose from Eleanor's arms, and the baby tumbled toward the floor. Time seemed to slow as Lena watched her daughter fall. With reflexes born of desperation, she twisted in midair, catching Rose against her chest and cushioning the infant's landing with her own body. Pain exploded through Lena's back as she hit the hardwood floor, but Rose was safe, crying lustily in her mother's arms. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, her white dress torn and stained with blood. In her hand, she still clutched the vial of poison, though some of its contents had spilled during the struggle. "I give her back," Eleanor shrieked, lunging forward with fingers curved like claws. "She belongs to me." Calvin fired a warning shot into the ceiling, raining plaster down on all of them. "Stay back, Eleanor. I mean it." But Eleanor was beyond reason now, beyond fear. She threw herself at Lena and Rose with the desperate fury of a wild animal protecting its young. The three of them rolled across the floor in a tangle of limbs and desperation, Eleanor trying to wrench the baby away while Lena fought to protect her daughter. "Mine," Eleanor screamed, her fingernails raking across Lena's face. "She's mine. James is mine." Lena managed to kick Eleanor away and struggled to her feet, still clutching Rose protectively. But Eleanor was already up again, moving with the inhuman strength of complete madness. "You don't understand." Eleanor's voice was hoarse from screaming. "I've waited 15 years for this moment, 15 years of failure and disappointment, and children who weren't strong enough to carry James's soul. But this one is different. This one is perfect." She advanced on Lena like a predator, stalking prey, the poison vial raised like a weapon. "I'll make her perfect, even if I have to kill her first. Dead children can't disappoint you. Dead children can't leave you." Calvin tried to get a clear shot, but the women were too close together, moving too erratically in the dim candlelight. One wrong move, and he might hit the baby. The struggle moved toward the window, where the storm raged with biblical fury. Lightning illuminated the scene in stark, stroboscopic flashes, Eleanor's face twisted with madness. Lena's determined to protect her child, Rose's innocent eyes wide with terror. Eleanor grabbed for the baby again, her movements becoming more frantic and uncontrolled. "Give me James! Give me my son!" "Her name is Rose," Lena shouted back, dodging Eleanor's grasping hands. "She's not your dead child. She's not your second chance. She's her own person." Lies. Eleanor's composure had completely shattered. "Everything you say is lies. James has come back to me. God has answered my prayers." She lunged forward one more time, and this time she managed to grab Rose's blanket. For a terrifying moment, the two women played tug-of-war with the baby between them, Rose's cries growing more distressed as she was pulled back and forth. "Let go," Lena screamed. "You're hurting her." "I'm saving her," Eleanor shot back. "Saving her from a life with an unfit mother." That's when Mrs. Pike's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Everybody freeze, or I'll blow you all to kingdom come." The elderly woman stood in the doorway, like an avenging angel, her double-barreled shotgun trained on Eleanor's chest. Rain dripped from her gray hair, and her eyes held the hard determination of someone who'd survived 40 years on the frontier. "I've been watching this house for months," Mrs. Pike announced, her voice carrying the authority of absolute conviction. "Watching young women disappear, watching you play your sick games. But it ends tonight." Eleanor's face went white with shock and rage. "How dare you? This is my house, my family. You have no right." "I have every right to stop a child killer," Mrs. Pike interrupted. "And that's exactly what you are, isn't it? A woman so twisted by grief that she'd rather murder babies than face the truth about her own failures." "I never murdered anyone." Eleanor's voice cracked with hysteria. "They died. They all died because they weren't strong enough to carry James's spirit." James is dead," Mrs. Pike said with brutal honesty. "He's been dead for 15 years, and all your killing won't bring him back." Eleanor's face crumpled, but her grip on Rose remained iron tight. "You don't understand. None of you understand. I felt him move inside me. I held him in my arms. I watched him take his first breath, and I watched him take his last. a mother never forgets. For just a moment, the room was silent, except for the storm raging outside and Rose's increasingly weak cries. Then Eleanor's expression changed, becoming eerily calm and focused. "If I can't have James," she said with deadly quiet, "then no one can have anything." She raised the vial of poison toward Rose's mouth, her movements deliberate and final. But Lena was already moving her maternal instincts, overriding exhaustion and pain. The two women collided again, this time with such force that they crashed through the window in an explosion of glass and wooden frame. Eleanor's scream mixed with the howling wind as they tumbled into the storm, still fighting for control of the baby. They hit the sloped roof of the kitchen below, their fall broken, but not stopped. Eleanor lost her grip on both Rose and the poison vial as they rolled across the wet shingles. The vial shattered against the copper, guttering its contents, mixing with the rainwater and washing away into the storm. Lena managed to shield Rose from the worst of the impact, but she felt something give way in her ribs as they continued to slide toward the edge of the roof. Below them, the courtyard waited with unforgiving hardness. "Mama." Rose's cry was stronger now, more indignant than frightened, and the sound gave Lena strength she didn't know she possessed. She dug her fingernails into the wooden shingles, fighting desperately to stop their slide toward death. Eleanor was doing the same, but her grip was weakening her white dress, now torn and bloody from their passage across the rough roof. "Help me." Eleanor gasped, reaching toward Lena with desperate fingers. "Please, I don't want to die." For a moment, Lena hesitated. This woman had murdered her family, stolen her freedom, tried to kill her baby. Every rational part of her mind said to let Eleanor fall, to let justice take its natural course. But as she looked into Eleanor's eyes, she saw not a monster, but a broken woman driven mad by grief. Someone who'd lost herself so completely in the pursuit of an impossible dream that she'd forgotten how to be human. "Take my hand," Lena said, reaching out despite everything. Eleanor's fingers closed around Lena's wrist with desperate strength. For a moment, it seemed like they might both survive, might both find a way back from the edge of destruction. Then Eleanor's weight shifted, and Lena felt herself being pulled toward the edge. She had to choose save Eleanor and risk falling with her, or save herself and Rose by letting the madwoman go. There was no choice at all. Lena pulled back, wrenching her hand free from Eleanor's grip. The older woman's eyes widened with shock and betrayal as she realized what was happening. "Please," Eleanor whispered, "please don't let me die alone." "You're not alone," Lena said softly. "James is waiting for you." Eleanor's face transformed, her expression becoming peaceful for the first time since Lena had known her. "James, my baby boy, he's waiting," Lena repeated. "He's been waiting for you to come home." Eleanor smiled, her grip on the roof relaxing. "I'm coming, sweetheart. Mama's coming." She let go. Falling action. Resolution of all threads. The storm passed with Eleanor's death, as if nature itself had been holding its breath, waiting for the madness to end. By dawn, the desert was washed clean, and the sun rose over a world that seemed somehow lighter without Eleanor Blackwood's presence. Mrs. Pike had summoned the territorial marshal, who arrived with a small posse and a prison wagon. They found Calvin in the library, drunk, but coherent enough to make a full confession. Dr. Patterson had fled during the night, but he wouldn't get far. The marshal had already sent word to neighboring territories. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Eleanor's crimes. The basement museum was photographed and cataloged. At the hidden cemetery in the North Pasture was excavated, and a pattern of corruption that reached from Arizona to Colorado was exposed. Newspapers across the territory ran headlines about the Blackwood horror, and Eleanor's name became synonymous with the dangers that lurked beneath civilized society's veneer. But for Lena, the most important discovery was a locked room in Eleanor's private quarters. Inside were dozens of letters, correspondence from families searching for missing daughters, sisters, friends. Eleanor had kept them all, reading them like a form of entertainment, savoring the anguish of people she'd robbed of their loved ones. Among them was a letter that made Lena's blood run cold. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, I am writing to inquire about employment opportunities at your ranch. My niece, Lena Doyle, recently lost her family in an Apache raid, and I believe she would benefit from a structured environment where she could learn proper domestic skills. I am prepared to sign any necessary papers to transfer guardianship, and I understand that a modest fee would be appropriate for your trouble in taking on this responsibility. Your servant, Ezra Doyle. The date on the letter was 3 weeks before the Apache raid. Eleanor hadn't just taken advantage of Lena's tragedy, she'd orchestrated it from the beginning, working with Ezra to eliminate Lena's family and create the perfect conditions for her abduction. The revelation filled Lena with a cold fury that burned brighter than grief. Ezra was still out there, probably already arranging the sale of another desperate girl to another wealthy predator. But that would have to wait. First, she had more immediate concerns. Calvin's trial was a foregone conclusion. His confession was complete and detailed, leaving no doubt about his guilt. But his cooperation with the investigation and his obvious remorse earned him a degree of mercy from the judge. 15 years in Yuma prison, the judge pronounced, with the possibility of parole after 10 years contingent on continued good behavior and assistance with ongoing investigations into territorial human trafficking networks. Calvin accepted the sentence with quiet dignity. As they led him away in shackles, he stopped beside Lena's seat in the courtroom. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me." "I already have." Lena replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. "You saved us when it mattered most. That counts for something." Calvin's eyes filled with tears, and he nodded once, before allowing the guards to lead him away. Lena never saw him again, but she heard he became a model prisoner, spending his time writing letters to the families of Eleanor's victims and helping prosecutors build cases against other members of the trafficking network. Dr. Patterson was eventually captured in New Mexico, trying to cross the border into Mexico. His trial revealed that he'd been complicit in at least a dozen murders, providing both the medical expertise to make the deaths look natural and the death certificates to make them official. He was sentenced to hang a fate he met with considerably less dignity than his crimes deserved. As for the Blackwood Ranch itself, it was seized by the territorial government and sold at auction. The proceeds went to a fund established for the families of Eleanor's victims, not much compensation for their losses, but a gesture of recognition that their loved ones had mattered. Lena used her portion of the money, along with a small inheritance she discovered she was entitled to from her parents' estate, to buy a modest house in California. But before she left Arizona territory forever, she had one final piece of business to attend to. Final confrontation and true resolution. Ezra Doyle was still living in the same squalid cabin where he'd grown up, still drinking away his days and scheming his nights. When Lena appeared on his doorstep with Rose in her arms and a Colt .45 on her hip, his face went white as bleached bone. "Lena," he stammered, "but you're supposed to be... I thought you were... dead." Lena's voice was calm as winter morning. "Is that what Eleanor told you would happen? Did she promise you I'd just disappear quietly?" Ezra's eyes darted nervously around the room, looking for escape routes or weapons. "I don't know what you're talking about. I sold you to a respectable family. I thought I was helping you. You murdered my family," Lena said with quiet certainty. "You arranged for the Apache raid, didn't you? Told them exactly when my parents would be most vulnerable, exactly how to make it look like random violence. That's crazy talk. I loved your pa like a brother. You loved his land. You loved the idea of clearing your gambling debts by selling his daughter into slavery." Lena shifted Rose to one arm, her other hand resting casually on the butt of her pistol. "How much did Eleanor pay you, Ezra? What was my family's life worth?" Ezra's facade of innocence crumbled completely. $50, he whispered. She paid me $50 for the information about the homestead and another 100 when you were delivered safely. $150 for 4 lives. Lena's voice carried no emotion at all. My parents, my brother Tommy and me, that's what we were worth to you. Lena, please, you don't understand. I had debts. Bad men were threatening to kill me if I didn't pay up. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Lena replied. You could have come to my father for help. You could have found honest work. You could have faced your debts like a man instead of murdering your own family to pay them. She drew the Colt with smooth precision, its barrel coming to rest between Ezra's eyes. Her hand was steady, her voice calm, but her eyes held the cold fire of absolute judgment. I should kill you, she said matter-of-factly. I should put a bullet in your brain and leave you for the buzzards. It would be justice. Please, Ezra whimpered. Please, I'm your blood, your father's sister's son, family. Family. Lena's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Family doesn't sell family to monsters. Family doesn't arrange for the murder of innocent children. You stopped being my family the moment you took Eleanor's gold. For a long moment they stared at each other across the barrel of the gun. Ezra cowering and begging Lena, weighing his life against the crimes he'd committed. Rose cooed softly in her arms, innocent of the violence that had shaped her short life. Finally, Lena lowered the weapon. I'm not going to kill you, she said. Not because you deserve mercy, but because my daughter doesn't need to see her mother become a murderer. Ezra sagged with relief, but Lena wasn't finished. However, she continued. I am going to make sure everyone in this territory knows exactly what kind of man you are. I'm going to tell your story in every saloon, every church, every gathering place from here to California. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to show your face in civilized company. She holstered the pistol and adjusted Rose in her arms. And if I ever hear about you trying to hurt another family, another girl, I'll come back. And next time, I won't be feeling so charitable. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Ezra. Those gambling debts you were so worried about, the men you owed money to. They've been asking about you. Seems they heard about Eleanor's gold and figure you've been holding out on them. I'd watch my back if I were you. Lena walked away, without looking back, leaving Ezra to contemplate a future that suddenly looked very uncertain indeed. She never saw him again, but she heard he left Arizona territory within the week, probably fleeing his creditors as much as his conscience. True ending, years later. 5 years later, Lena stood on the porch of her boarding house in Sacramento, watching Rose play in the garden with the other children. The little girl was healthy and happy with her mother's auburn hair and a laugh that could brighten the darkest day. She had no memory of her terrible birth, no knowledge of the violence that had shaped her early life. The boarding house was Lena's way of giving back a safe haven for women fleeing bad situations, a place where they could find shelter and support while rebuilding their lives. She'd had no shortage of residents over the years, and the network of former guests had become an informal support system stretching across the Western territories. Mrs. Pike visited regularly, having sold her Arizona ranch and moved to California to be closer to her adopted family. The old woman had become Rose's doting grandmother, teaching her to shoot and ride and handle herself in a world that could be cruel to women. Any word from the territorial authorities? Mrs. Pike asked, settling into the rocking chair beside Lena. The Patterson appeal was denied, Lena replied. He hangs next month, and Calvin's up for parole consideration next year. Will you testify on his behalf? Lena considered the question. Probably. He made terrible choices, but he tried to do right at the end. That has to count for something. Rose came running up to the porch, her face flushed with excitement. Mama, Mrs. Garcia says she's going to teach me to make tamales. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart, Lena said, scooping her daughter into her arms. But wash your hands first. As Rose scampered off to clean up, Mrs. Pike shook her head in amazement. "Look at her. Happy, healthy, completely normal. You'd never know what she came from." "She didn't come from Eleanor's madness," Lena said firmly. "She came from love, from hope, from the belief that tomorrow can be better than today." A letter arrived that afternoon, delivered by a young woman whose face was marked by recent bruises, but whose eyes held determined hope. Lena had been expecting her another refugee from the network of violence and exploitation that still plagued the territories. "Mrs. Doyle," the woman asked hesitantly. "I'm Sarah Martinez. Mrs. Henderson in Phoenix said you might have room for me and my baby." "Of course," Lena said warmly, opening the door wide. "Come in, both of you. You're safe now." As she helped Sarah settle into one of the boarding house's comfortable rooms, Lena reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She'd started as a victim, a piece of property to be bought and sold. But she'd emerged as something stronger, a protector, a beacon of hope for other women trapped in impossible situations. That night, after the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Lena sat in her study writing letters. One was to a prosecutor in Colorado, providing information about suspected trafficking routes. Another was to a newspaper editor in Denver, arranging for coverage of an upcoming trial. A third was to a women's rights organization in New York, sharing strategies and resources. The last letter was different, addressed to Rose to be opened on her 18th birthday. "My dearest daughter, by the time you read this, you'll be a woman grown ready to make your own way in the world. I hope I've raised you to be strong, compassionate, and unafraid of standing up for what's right. There are things about your birth, about the circumstances that brought you into this world, that I've never told you. Someday when you're ready, I'll share that story. But for now, I want you to know this. You were born from love, protected by courage, and raised in hope. Your life began in darkness, but you brought light into the world from your very first breath. You reminded me that love can't be bought or stolen or forced. It can only be freely given. And I give mine to you without reservation, without conditions, without limits. Be brave, my darling girl. Be kind. Be true to yourself and to the values we've tried to instill in you. And remember that no matter how dark the world sometimes seems, there are always people willing to fight for what's right. Your loving mother, Lena Doyle." She sealed the letter and placed it in her desk drawer next to similar letters she'd written each year on Rose's birthday. Someday her daughter would need to know the truth about Eleanor Blackwood, about the evil that had tried to claim her before she was even born. But for now, it was enough that she was safe, loved, and free to become whoever she chose to be. Outside, the California night was warm and peaceful, filled with the sounds of crickets and distant laughter. It was a far cry from the storm-lashed desert, where Rose had been born, a world away from the madness that had tried to consume them both. Lena closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of perfect contentment. She had survived the worst that humanity could offer, had protected her daughter from the darkness that had shaped her own early life, and had built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. In the end, that was all anyone could do: take the hand they were dealt and play it with courage, compassion, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of redemption. The desert wind no longer howled with the voices of the damned. Instead, it whispered of hope, healing, and the endless possibility of tomorrow. Rose Doyle would grow up free, and in that freedom lay the ultimate victory over Eleanor Blackwood's twisted legacy of possession and control. The story was finished. The circle was complete. And in a boarding house in Sacramento, a mother's love had finally triumphed over a madwoman's obsession.